Your hands. Show me your hands. I pour tea. That is what you hired me to do. Then explain to me why my brother is still breathing. Everyone in that room said she was finished. The hospital director who signed the papers that ended her career. The colleagues who watched her pack her office and said nothing. The licensing board that stamped her file with a mark no employer would look past. Vanessa Vaughn had been a surgeon for 11 years before she became invisible. And she had been invisible for 3 more before she walked into a distillery in Nonhyundong and poured oolong tea for a man whose empire was built on counterfeits. What happens when the person who destroyed your life discovers you have been pouring tea for the one man in Seoul powerful enough to destroy his? Stay with this one, because the tea service is only the beginning. Before this story ends, a woman who was told she would never hold a scalpel again will stand in a sealed vault with 14 seconds on a lock she taught herself to crack when she was 9 years old in North Nashville, and the man who watched her hands will finally understand what he hired when he thought he was hiring silence. Kwangtae Hwangbo was 24 years old, heir to a family whose name opened doors and closed mouths across 3 countries. He could not tell a genuine Hermes stitch from one of his own factory's fakes, and he had built an entire operation around making sure no one ever found out. He noticed everything about people. The way they held their shoulders, the way they poured, the way their fingers moved when they thought no one was watching. He watched Vanessa Vaughn pour tea for 7 weeks before he asked her a single question. And when he finally did, he asked the wrong one. This story does not end the way you think it will. It does not end with revenge. It does not end with a man saving a woman who needed saving. It ends with a choice she made when she could have walked away, and a document that had been sitting in a file for 3 years waiting for someone to read it out loud. Before we go any further, I need to know something. Have you ever been the person who took the blame so someone else could keep their career? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who is listening. 7 weeks earlier, the distillery sat on a narrow street in Nonhyundong where the old buildings pressed together like relatives at a funeral, sharing walls and keeping secrets. Vanessa Vaughn walked through the service entrance at 6:47 in the morning, the way she had every morning for the past 8 months. And the security guard at the door did not look up from his phone. She was 34 years old, 5'6". Born in a converted attic apartment on Jefferson Street in North Nashville, where her grandmother did hair out of the kitchen for the whole street and taught her that you watch people's hands if you want to know what they are thinking. She had been a surgeon for 11 years. Trauma, mostly. The kind of work that meant you woke up at 2 a.m. and did not complain about it because the person on the table needed you to be steady. She was not a surgeon anymore. The tea room was on the 2nd floor, through a hallway lined with glass cases that held bottles of soju, so old the labels had faded to sepia. Private meetings happened here. The kind where men decided things that affected other men's lives, and someone needed to pour the tea without hearing anything worth remembering. Vanessa set her bag in the staff closet, changed into the slate gray hanbok that marked her as service, and began preparing the first tray of the day. Her hands moved the way they always moved, precise, unhurried. The ceramic cups arranged at exactly the same distance from each other. The pot handle turned 7 degrees left of center, because that was where it would be easiest to lift without disturbing the table. These were habits she had built when the stakes were different, when the tray was a surgical instrument table and the cups were clamps, and the person across from her was opened up and trusting her to close them again. Nobody in this building knew that. The first guest arrived at 9:15, a textile importer from Busan who wanted to discuss distribution routes and spent 40 minutes talking about his boat. Vanessa poured. Vanessa listened. Vanessa said nothing that mattered. The second guest arrived at 11 o'clock, a woman in her 60s who represented a construction consortium and smiled like she was keeping score. Vanessa poured. The woman watched her hands and said, "You hold the pot like someone who has been trained." "I have been trained," Vanessa said, "in tea service." The woman's smile did not change. She went back to her phone call. Vanessa cleared the cups when the woman left and thought about what it cost to be invisible in a room full of people who believed they could read anyone. 3 years now. 3 years of learning to make her hands say nothing but what the moment required. 3 years of watching herself become someone who poured tea and asked no questions and went home at night to an apartment the size of her old supply closet. She had been good at her job once. She had been exceptional. Then Xavier Baker decided she was expendable. The name still sat in her chest like a stone she had swallowed and could not pass. Xavier Baker, Hospital Director of Atlanta Presbyterian. A man who smiled at donors and made the hard decisions and understood that institutions survive only when individuals are willing to be sacrificed for them. It had been a clear night in March when the patient died. Aortic dissection, caught late. The attending surgeon had been drinking at a gala 2 hours before, and Vanessa had been the senior resident who assisted when things went wrong. She had not known about the drinking. She had not been in a position to refuse the case. And when the family started asking questions and the lawyers started circling, Xavier Baker had called her into his office and closed the door. "Someone has to take this," he said. "You understand that." She understood it perfectly. She was 31. She had no family on the board. She had a name that was easy to forget and a face that certain people found difficult to distinguish from other faces. She was convenient. "The attending made a mistake," she said. "The attending has 2 decades of donor relationships," Xavier said. His voice was patient, the way you are patient with someone who has not yet learned how the world works. "You have potential. Potential can be rebuilt. Reputation cannot." She should have fought. She knew that now. She should have hired a lawyer and gone to the press and refused to be the person who carried someone else's weight. But she had been young, and she had been tired, and she had believed him when he said the board would remember her cooperation when the time came to reinstate her license. 3 years later, her name was still on a list that no hospital in the country would hire past. Xavier Baker sent her a card every Christmas. Season's greetings, best wishes for the new year. She threw them away without opening them after the first one. The door to the tea room opened at 1:43 in the afternoon, and Kwangtae Hwangbo walked in with 2 men she had never seen before. She knew who he was, of course. Everyone in this building knew who he was. 24 years old. Heir to a family whose influence spanned 3 countries and whose fortune was built on counterfeits so perfect that the luxury houses had stopped suing and started negotiating. He came to the distillery once a week to meet people whose names Vanessa never learned, and he moved through rooms like someone who expected the air to rearrange itself around him. He was not handsome in the way magazine covers demanded. His face was too sharp, his mouth too certain. But he watched people the way Vanessa used to watch surgical monitors, and that kind of attention was its own form of presence. She had been pouring tea for him for 7 weeks. He had never asked her name. Today, he sat at the low table by the window, and the 2 men with him sat across from him, and Vanessa brought the first tray and began the service. "The Incheon shipment was delayed," one of the men said. "Customs is asking questions about the documentation." "Which documentation?" Kwangtae said. His voice was quiet. Vanessa had noticed that about him. The more serious the conversation, the softer he spoke. "The certificates of authenticity. Someone filed a complaint." Vanessa poured. The tea hit the cup in a thin, steady stream. She did not look up. "Find out who filed it," Kwangtae said. "We're working on it." "Work faster." Vanessa moved to the second cup. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. 11 years of surgery had burned the tremor out of her, the way fire burns the impurities out of metal. "The other thing," the second man said. "Your brother." Kwangtae's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, the kind most people would miss. Vanessa did not miss it. "What about him?" "The debt is larger than we thought. He owes money to people we cannot negotiate with, the kind of people who do not wait for payment plans." Silence. Vanessa finished pouring and stepped back, the tray held at her side. She was supposed to leave now. She was supposed to bow and walk out and let these men discuss whatever they were going to discuss without an audience. "How much?" Kwangtae said. 200 million won, due in 6 weeks. Another silence. Then Kwangtae said, "Leave." The two men looked at each other. "Both of you," Kwangtae said. "Now." They left. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Vanessa stood by the wall, still holding the tray, waiting to be dismissed. Kwangtae did not dismiss her. Instead, he picked up his tea and drank it in one long swallow, which was not how you were supposed to drink tea that had been poured by someone trained in the ceremony. Then he set the cup down and looked at her for the first time. Not at her hands, not at the tray, at her. "You poured tea for me 3 weeks ago," he said, "when I was meeting with the textile consortium. Do you remember?" "Yes," Vanessa said. "I spilled my cup, knocked it with my elbow." The tea went across the table and onto a contract worth $40,000. She remembered. He had been distracted that day, looking at his phone every few seconds, waiting for a message that did not come. "You cleaned it," he said. "You cleaned it faster than I have ever seen anyone move, and then you poured a new cup and placed it in front of me without saying a word. And when the meeting ended, I asked my staff who you were, and they told me you were a private chef who had been doing tea service for 8 months. No background to speak of, no connections, no history." Vanessa said nothing. "That is the story they gave me," Kwangtae said. "I do not believe it." "I pour tea," she said. "That is what you hired me to do. I have watched you pour tea for 7 weeks. You move like someone who has spent years learning how to be calm in a crisis. You read a room before you walk into it. You position yourself where you can see the door and the window at the same time, every time, without thinking about it. And 3 days ago, when one of my guards had a seizure in the hallway and everyone else was standing around waiting for someone to tell them what to do, you were the one who turned him on his side and checked his airway and counted the seconds until the paramedics arrived. He had seen that. She had not realized he had seen that. "I have some first aid training," she said. 11 years of surgical residency and practice is not first aid training, Dr. Vaughn." The name hit her like a door slamming. She had not heard anyone call her that in 3 years. "I read people," Kwangtae said. "It is the only skill I have that matters. I cannot tell a genuine stitch from a fake. Did you know that? I am colorblind in a way that makes the work my family does impossible for me to verify myself. I have an entire team whose job is to feed me the right answers in real time, so that no one ever discovers that the heir to a counterfeiting empire cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is not." He was telling her something she could use against him. She understood that. He was putting a weapon in her hand to see what she would do with it. "But I can tell when someone is lying," he said. "And I can tell when someone is hiding something they are not ashamed of." "You have been hiding yourself in this room for 8 months. I want to know why." Vanessa looked at him. 24 years old, 10 years younger than her, heir to a family that could make problems disappear and people along with them. She had no reason to trust him. She had no reason to trust anyone. 3 years ago, she said, I was a surgeon at a hospital in Atlanta. A patient died on my table because the attending physician had been drinking, and I was the one who took the blame for it. The man who signed the report that ended my career is named Xavier Baker, and he keeps my name on a list that makes sure no hospital in the country will hire me again. I came to Seoul because it was far enough away that I could stop being the person everyone looked at with pity, and I stayed because there was nothing left to go back to. Kwangtae was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The document that ended your career, is it still on file?" "Yes." "Have you ever seen it?" "No," she said. "They told me what it said. I never saw the actual report." He nodded once. Something shifted in his face that she could not read. "Keep pouring tea," he said. "And the next time my brother does something stupid enough to get himself killed, do not pretend you do not know how to help. He stood and walked out, and Vanessa was left alone in the room with an empty cup and a question she did not know how to answer. 2 weeks passed. Kwangtae did not mention their conversation again. He came to the distillery on Tuesdays and Thursdays, met with men whose names Vanessa still did not learn, and drank his tea the wrong way every time. She poured, she watched. She said nothing that mattered, but something had shifted. He looked at her now. Not the way men usually looked at women who served them, as furniture that happened to move. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at contracts before he signed them, reading the clauses no one else bothered to read. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her feel like someone had turned on a light in a room she had forgotten was dark. On the third Thursday, his brother came to the distillery. She knew who he was before anyone said his name. The resemblance was there in the jaw, the way they both held their shoulders. But where Kwangtae moved like someone who expected the world to accommodate him, his brother moved like someone who had been running from something for so long he had forgotten how to stand still. Hwangbo was 27 years old. He had the look of a man who had once been handsome and was now being worn down by his own choices, the skin under his eyes too dark, his hands too restless. He sat across from Kwangtae at the low table by the window, and Vanessa brought the tray. "I need more time," Minjun said. "You have had time. 6 weeks is not enough. The interest alone is more than I can cover." Kwangtae's voice was soft. "You should have thought about that before you borrowed money from people who charge interest by the day." "I thought I could win it back." "You thought wrong," Vanessa poured. The tea hit the cup in a thin stream, and she watched Minjun's hands on the table, the way his fingers kept curling and uncurling like he was trying to hold on to something that was not there. "I cannot ask father," Minjun said. "No, you cannot." "Then help me. You have the resources. You have the connections." Kwangtae was quiet for a long moment. Vanessa finished pouring and stepped back. "I will help you," Kwangtae said finally, "but not the way you want. Not. I will not give you money to throw away on the same tables that put you in this position. I will negotiate with the people you owe, and I will buy your debt myself, and you will pay me back over time. Do you understand what that means?" Minjun's face changed, relief and something else, something that looked like shame. "It means you own me. It means I am the one you answer to now, not them, me." Vanessa should have left the room. She knew that. But something in the way Kwangtae said it made her stay, made her listen, made her understand that this was not cruelty. This was a man trying to save his brother from the kind of people who did not negotiate. Minjun nodded once, sharply, and stood up without drinking his tea. "I will have the paperwork drawn up," Kwangtae said. "You will sign it tomorrow." His brother left. The door closed. Kwangtae looked at Vanessa. "You are still here," he said. "You did not dismiss me." "No," he said. "I did not." He picked up his cup and drank the tea in one swallow, the way he always did. Then he set it down and said, "My brother owes money to people who would kill him for the amount he has borrowed. I'm going to buy that debt and hold it myself because it is the only way to keep him alive. Do you think that makes me generous or controlling?" It was the kind of question that had no safe answer. "I think it makes you someone who would rather be owed than lose," she said. Something flickered in his face. Amusement, maybe. Or recognition. "You understand that better than most people would." She did not answer. She did not need to. The fourth week, the email arrived. She was in her apartment, the one she had been renting for 8 months from a property management company whose name she had never bothered to remember. It was small and clean and anonymous, the kind of place where you could disappear if you needed to. The email was from a hospital in Daegu, a small regional facility that had posted a surgical position 6 months ago. She had applied on a night when the loneliness was bad enough to make her forget why she had stopped applying. "Dear Dr. Vaughn," the email said, "thank you for your interest in the position.
After careful review of your credentials and consultation with your previous employers, we regret to inform you that we are unable to move forward with your application at this time. She read it 3 times. Then she opened her laptop and searched for the name at the bottom of the email. The medical director who had signed it. It took her 20 minutes to find the connection. The medical director had trained at Johns Hopkins, the same year as a woman named Helen Park, who now served on the advisory board of a nonprofit that Xavier Baker had founded 4 years ago. The nonprofit raised money for surgical residency programs. It connected hospitals across 3 continents. It made Xavier Baker the kind of man that people called when they had questions about applicants with complicated histories. He was still watching her. 3 years and 6,000 miles, and he was still making sure she stayed where he had put her. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The next morning, she poured tea for Kwangtae and said nothing about the email, but he noticed anyway. "You are different today," he said, after the other guests had left. "I'm the same. Your hands are the same. Your face is the same, but something behind your eyes has closed." He tilted his head, studying her. "Someone hurt you, recently, within the last day." She did not answer. "The man who ended your career," Kwangtae said, "Xavier Baker. What do you know about him?" "I know he was hospital director of Atlanta Presbyterian. I know he signed the report that ended my license. I know he keeps my name on a list that follows me wherever I go." "What else?" "Nothing else." Kwangtae was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had someone look into him after you told me your story." The words landed like a stone in still water. "Why?" she said. "Because I wanted to understand who decided you were expendable." He met her eyes. "He has done this before. You were not the first, and you were not the last. There are 7 other names on that list. 7 other people whose careers ended because someone more connected needed protection. 7. She had thought she was alone. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know you are not the only one." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the narrow street below. "And because I think you have spent 3 years believing you did something wrong, and I want you to understand that you did not. You were simply the person in the room with the least power to fight back." She should have thanked him. She should have been grateful that someone was finally telling her what she had suspected all along. Instead, she said, "What do you want from me?" He turned back to look at her. "I want you to stop pretending you are just a woman who pours tea. I want you to remember that you spent 11 years saving lives, and that the hands you are using to lift a ceramic pot are the same hands that held a scalpel steady while someone's heart was open on a table. I want you to decide what you are going to do about the man who took that from you. And if I decide to do nothing, then I will respect that choice." He walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "But I do not think you will. You are not the kind of person who does nothing." He left. Vanessa stood alone in the room and felt something she had not felt in 3 years. The first tremor of anger that was not pointed at herself. The 5th week, Xavier Baker came to Seoul. She found out the way she found out everything now. By listening in rooms where people forgot she was there. A pharmaceutical conference at one of the hotels in Gangnam. 3 days of panels and networking events and dinners where men like Xavier Baker made connections that would shape medical policy for years. He was staying at the same hotel where the distillery sometimes held private events. She should have avoided him. She should have stayed in her small apartment and poured tea and waited for him to leave the country without ever knowing she was here. Instead, she asked for extra shifts. She was pouring tea for a group of investors on the 2nd evening of the conference when she heard his voice in the hallway. That particular tone, the one that sounded warm until you listened to what it was actually saying. The voice of a man who had learned how to make cruelty sound like kindness. She kept pouring. Her hands did not shake. Then the door opened, and Xavier Baker walked in. He looked older than she remembered. His hair was grayer, his face more lined. But his eyes were the same, that careful watchfulness that always made her feel like she was being measured against a standard she could not see. He did not recognize her immediately. She was in the slate-gray hanbok, her hair pulled back, her face turned away from the door. She was service. She was invisible. Then he looked at her hands. "Vanessa," he said. The investors at the table looked up. Kwangtae, who she had not realized was in the room until that moment, went very still. "Dr. Baker," she said. Her voice was steady. Her voice was always steady. "I heard you left the country. Someone told me you were working in a restaurant somewhere." He smiled, the way he had smiled in his office 3 years ago when he told her that someone had to take the fall. "I see they were not far wrong. I pour tea." "Yes, I can see that." He walked closer, looking at her the way you look at something you once owned and discarded. "It suits you, I think. You always were better with your hands than your judgment." Kwangtae stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate, the way a predator moves when it has decided to stop watching and start acting. The investors at the table went quiet. "Dr. Baker," Kwangtae said. His voice was soft. "Do you know who I am?" Xavier turned, still smiling. "I'm afraid I don't." "My name is Kwangtae Hwangbo. My family owns this distillery and the hotel it sits in, and the building where you are staying." He walked around the table until he was standing between Xavier and Vanessa. "And the woman you just insulted has been a guest in my house for 8 months." Xavier's smile faltered. "I was not aware," he said. "I apologize for any offense." "You apologize to me," Kwangtae said, "but you have not apologized to her." The room was silent. Vanessa could hear her own heartbeat, steady and slow, the way it had been steady during 11 years of surgeries. Xavier turned to her. His face had gone carefully blank. "I apologize," he said. She looked at him. This man who had signed the document that ended her career. This man who had sent her Christmas cards every year like she was someone he was keeping track of. This man who had followed her halfway around the world with a list that made sure she would never practice medicine again. "No," she said. "You do not." She set down the teapot, turned, and walked out of the room. She was in the service corridor when she heard the shouting. It came from somewhere below, the kind of sound that cuts through walls and closed doors because it carries panic in every syllable. She knew that sound. 11 years of trauma surgery had taught her to recognize the difference between noise and emergency, and this was emergency. She ran. The stairwell was narrow, the steps worn smooth from years of deliveries and staff moving between floors. She took them 2 at a time, the slate-gray hanbok catching on her ankles, and when she reached the ground floor, she saw the crowd gathered near the back entrance. Minjun Hwangbo was on the floor. He was convulsing, his body arched, his hands clawing at his own chest like he was trying to reach something inside it. Blood was coming from somewhere, a dark stain spreading across his shirt, and the people around him were frozen the way people always freeze when they do not know what to do. Vanessa pushed through. "Move," she said. "All of you, move." She dropped to her knees beside him. His pulse was weak and erratic, his breathing shallow. The blood was coming from a wound in his side, ragged at the edges, the kind of wound that came from a blade held by someone who meant to kill. "Call an ambulance," she said. "Now." Someone was already on their phone. Good. She had maybe 4 minutes before he bled out, maybe less depending on what the blade had hit. Her hands moved without her telling them to. She pressed down on the wound, felt the pulse of blood against her palm, adjusted the pressure. She had done this 100 times, 1,000 times. The body remembered even when the mind tried to forget. "Stay with me," she said. "Minjon, stay with me." His eyes were open, unfocused, tracking something she could not see. Shock. He was going into shock. She looked up and saw Kwangtae standing at the edge of the crowd. His face was blank in a way that told her everything she needed to know about what was happening inside him. He was watching his brother die, and he could not do anything to stop it. "I need a clean cloth," she said. "Anything. Now." Someone handed her a kitchen towel. She folded it, pressed it against the wound, felt Minjun's breath catch. "The blade missed the kidney," she said. "It caught the muscle, but not the artery. He is going to live if we keep pressure on this until the ambulance arrives." Kwangtae knelt beside her. "You are sure?" he said. "I'm sure." The ambulance came in 7 minutes. She kept pressure on the wound the entire time, her hands steady, her voice calm, telling Minjun things she was not sure he could hear. When the paramedics took over, she stood and stepped back and realized her hands were covered in blood. Kwangtae was looking at her. "Your hands," he said. "Show me your hands." "I pour tea," she said. "That is what you hired me to do." "Then explain to me why my brother is still breathing." She did not answer. She did not need to. The hospital kept Minjun for 3 days. He had lost blood, but not enough to kill him. The blade had been held by a man who worked for the people he owed money to, the same people whose debt Kwangtae had not yet finished buying. A message, delivered in flesh. On the second day, Kwangtae came to her apartment. "There is something I need to show you," he said. "Something I found when I was looking into Xavier Baker." They drove to an office building in Gangnam, one of the tall glass towers where corporations kept their secrets in locked rooms. Kwangtae led her to a basement level, past security doors that opened with his face, until they reached a vault at the end of a narrow corridor. "The records are in here," he said. "The original report that ended your career. The files on the other 7 doctors he destroyed. Everything." Vanessa looked at the vault door. It was old, the kind of lock that had been installed before electronic systems became standard. A pin tumbler mechanism with 7 pins, she guessed. Maybe 8. "How did you know they were here?" she said. "Xavier Baker's nonprofit shares a management company with a subsidiary of my family's business. We have been funding his operation for 6 years without knowing what it was. When I started looking into him, I discovered that this building is where the nonprofit keeps its operational records." He paused. "Including the blacklist." She understood what he was saying. His family's money had been keeping Xavier Baker in power all along. The irony of it sat in her chest like a second heartbeat. "The vault is sealed," he said. "The combination died with the administrator who set it up. We cannot get a locksmith in here without questions being asked." Vanessa walked to the vault door. She ran her fingers along the dial, feeling the resistance, the way the mechanism moved under her touch. She had taught herself to do this when she was 9 years old, alone in a converted attic apartment in North Nashville while her grandmother worked downstairs. It had started as a way to get into locked closets and ended as a hobby she had never quite given up. "Give me 14 seconds, she said. She closed her eyes. The pins spoke to her the way they always did, each one clicking into place as she turned the dial. 7 pins, then 8, then the final tumble, and the door swung open. Inside, there were files, rows of them, organized by year, each one containing the name of a doctor whose career Xavier Baker had ended. Her name was third from the left. She pulled the file and opened it. Inside was the original report, the one she had never been allowed to see. The attending surgeon's name had been redacted, but there was a second page she had never known existed. A memo from Xavier Baker to the hospital board recommending that the investigation focus on the senior resident in order to protect the attending's donor relationships. He had put it in writing. He had been so certain she would never see it that he had put his reasoning in writing. "We can destroy him," Kwangtae said. "Right now. I can make one phone call and his nonprofit loses its funding. Another call and his name is on every medical board in the country. He will never practice again. Vanessa looked at the memo in her hands. She thought about 3 years of silence. 3 years of pouring tea and saying nothing and believing she deserved what had happened to her. She thought about the 7 other names in this vault, the 7 other people whose lives Xavier Baker had decided were worth less than institutional convenience. She thought about what it would feel like to destroy him the way he had destroyed her, and then she thought about who she wanted to be when this was over. "No," she said. Kwangtae looked at her. "I do not want him destroyed," she said. "I want him held accountable, through proper channels, through the medical board and the licensing authorities and the courts. I want this memo submitted as evidence, and I want every one of those 7 doctors to have the chance to testify, and I want Xavier Baker to stand in a room full of his peers and explain why he decided we were expendable." She met Kwangtae's eyes. "You can end him with a phone call, but that is your power, not mine. And I spent 3 years having someone else's power used against me. I will not become the thing that broke me." The room was quiet. Then Kwangtae said, "You understand that this will take longer, that the outcome is not guaranteed." "I understand. And you still want to do it this way." "I want justice," she said, "not revenge. There is a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and something in his face changed in a way she could not quite name. "Then we do it your way," he said. 6 months later, the hearing concluded. Xavier Baker kept his position. He kept his name on letterhead and his seat at donor dinners. But the memo was entered into the record, and the 7 other doctors testified. And when it was over, the whispers followed him into every room he entered. His standing in the profession had cracked in ways that would never fully repair. Not destroyed, diminished. The kind of justice that is felt rather than announced. Vanessa watched the final ruling from a conference room in Seoul, Kwangtae sitting beside her with his hand resting near hers on the table. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the steadiness he had offered her for months without asking for anything in return. "It is done," he said. "It is done." She had expected to feel triumph. Instead, she felt something quieter, something that had weight but no sharp edges. Relief, maybe. Or the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for 3 years and finally setting it down. The hospital in Daegu called the following week. The position was still open. Her name had been removed from the list. She did not take it. Instead, she stayed in Seoul, in an apartment that was no longer anonymous, in a city where someone had looked at the full weight of her history and had not looked away. She began consulting for a trauma program at a teaching hospital. She poured tea on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at a distillery in Nonhyun-dong, because some rituals are worth keeping even when you no longer need them. And on a quiet evening in November, Kwangtae handed her his phone with a message on the screen. It was from Minjun. 3 words. "Thank you, both." She looked up at him, 24 years old, 10 years younger than her. A man who could not tell a genuine stitch from a fake and had built an empire anyway, because he understood something more important than details. He understood people. "You read me," she said. "From the beginning. You knew what I was." "I knew what you were hiding," he said. "I did not know what you were until you showed me." She had learned that power is not always loud. She had learned that the person who sees you clearly is more dangerous than the person who wants to own you. She had learned that dignity is a choice you make when no one is watching, and that the right person will notice anyway. She had learned that sometimes you have to pour tea for 7 weeks before someone asks the right question. Kwangtae's hand finally touched hers. "Stay," he said. She stayed. If this story meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. After everything, do you still believe someone can see you completely and stay? I really want to know. If you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, and I promise the next story will be even harder to walk away from. Thank you for watching until the very end. I will see you in the next one.